All right, everybody, welcome to the Excel Superstore analysis. So you can find this data set on our Canvas page. So go ahead and open it up and take a look at all of the variable names. Whenever you're looking at a spreadsheet for the first time, it's good to kind of identify all the variable names and to see what we're working with, right? So right here, this is a big data set on sales from a massive store. So we've got all of our different variables here, and each row will represent kind of one sale. So we can look at one row and we could see kind of what they bought, right? So we could see the category that it was and the subcategory, so like what exactly it was, the name of the product, and then also the sales, or how much it cost, and then the profit for this store. So we're going to do a lot of analysis using pivot tables today. So first I'm going to go ahead and just select all of my data right here using this top left button. Go ahead, hit insert and pivot table. And I'm just going to hit OK, and it's going to make a pivot table in another sheet. So now in here I can kind of put things in my pivot table fields so that we can kind of aggregate things by some attributes. So the first thing we're going to look at is our region. So I'm going to go to my pivot table fields over here, take region and drag it over to rows. Now right away we see our 4 different regions pop up: Central, East, South, and West. Now I'm going to unclick this blank. We don't need that. It's a good habit to get into. Just get rid of that blank option. So now we need to think, what do we actually want to look at? What do we care about? So first, let's look at profit and sales. So we can compare these two. So I'm going to take sales, drag it to values, and then also profit, right? So it automatically would do the sum of sales. So it's going to add together all of the sales here. And that's good. That's what we want for this one. So right away we can see this. We can see the total for sales and profit and a breakdown for each region. To make a graph, I'm going to just highlight this data, hit insert. Now I think for this one, it's probably good to visualize using some sort of circle chart. Now when I want to compare two different values at once, so here I'm comparing sales and profit, a good way I could visualize both of these in one graph is in a donut chart. So let's click donut and see what we get. Okay, cool. So our donut chart pops up and we get this kind of ring with 2 layers inside. Now right away it's kind of hard to tell what's what. It's easy to tell what the regions are, right? We see that Central is blue, East orange, South gray, and West is yellow. So if I want to make this bigger, I could just click here, go to home, and I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger here. All right, there we go. A little bit bigger, that's good. Okay, so we've got this donut chart, right? Hard to tell kind of what's what, so let's add some information on the graph. So whenever I want to kind of add anything in my graph, I can click it, right? And if I go to this design tab up here, we'll have a lot of kind of preset options, right? So you could use these to help out right up here, but let's go ahead and just go to add chart element. I'm gonna go add a chart title so we kind of know what we're talking about. Let's call this profit and sales by region, right? We can do something like that. Cool. So we got that here. I'm gonna make this part a little bit bigger. Awesome. So there we go. Add a title. Next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to add chart element and let's add a data label. So the data labels can kind of label each segment within the graph. So I'm going to hit show. Okay. So we see these numbers pop up. Now these numbers are the values over here from my pivot chart or my pivot table. Now this isn't really super helpful. Whenever we're thinking about pie charts or circle charts or donut charts, it's helpful to think about this as percents, right? As percents. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click my data labels here. Cool. So if I click here, I want to select all 4 of these. Sorry, Excel can be pretty finicky. Let me double click and then let's click here. And that brings up this format data labels menu on the right. General rule of thumb with Excel is, okay, if you want to edit something, just double click it and a menu will pop up, especially when we're working on charts like this. So I'm going to go to these 3 bars, go to label options. Now I'm going to click percentage, right? So now it changes the value to a percent. I'll do the same thing with these, right? So now I have these percents here. I can drag these around if I want to make it a little more visible, right? I can adjust the size of the font, right? Just by, if I select these, right? Let's see if I click these 4. If I go to home, let's make them a little bigger. Let's make them size 12. Okay, and I can also change the fonts, right? Maybe pick one you like. You can change the color of the text. This is pretty familiar with like Google Docs, anything that we're used to. Let's go with this one. That seems good. Ooh, I don't like that. I don't know why I made my numbers look like that. What should we pick? What's a good font here? We'll go with my favorite. Probably not the best font, but that's what we're doing for now. It's good to make our labels consistent, so let me go ahead and make those same changes to my other percents here. and they will all pop up just like that. There we go. Okay. Now, this is definitely not the best looking graph. I think you guys can make them look a little bit better than this, right? But we can keep playing around here. Now, another thing with this chart is it's hard to tell which ring is profit and which ring is sales. So a couple options we could do, right? We could see that we could add here, and we could go to data labels, and we could say category name, right? And that just, I'm sorry, not category name. Category name tells us the region, right? The category. We want the series name, right? So series name tells us, okay, the outer ring is profit, and the inner ring is sales, right? But it says sum of sales. That's a little wordy, so we could adjust this over here. Let's do series name, right? What if we adjust this name over here and just call it profit, right? We don't need that sum of. I think just profit will suffice. There we go. Now let me do the same thing over here. Let's do series name, but let's change this series name just to sales. Okay, wonderful. Cool, so I'm gonna drag them around so they're a little easier to see. But now, this graph is looking a bit better already, a little bit easier to read. So we can just drag these around so it's kind of easy to tell what everything is. Okay. So this is our donut chart, right? So here is really good because we could kind of compare the sales and profit between these regions, right? So right away we can tell that the West region had 32% of sales, but accounted for a higher percentage of profit, right? So they had 38% profit while they only contributed 32% sales, right? And we could see like Central is kind of the opposite, right? They have a lot more sales than profit. So that's an insight we could take away from this graph. All right, let's go ahead and move on. I'm gonna go back to this data set here. I'm gonna go to the next page of my handout. All right, next thing I'm gonna look at is this next question, which is looking at the subcategory of basically just kind of product type, right? So we see all these different options here, and then also comparing that with segment, right? So who is kind of buying these products? Is it the consumer? Is it for home office or corporate? So to do that, right, we want to use pivot tables again. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a new pivot table. You could do it in the one we did last, but I want to go ahead and keep that. So I'm going to do this here. We could rename these pivot table sheets, but I'm just going to keep it like this for now. So for my rows down here, I'm going to take my subcategory, right? So let's go ahead and do this, right? And we see all the different types here. I'm going to get rid of blank. Good habit. So we see all the different types of products that this Superstore sells. Now let's take our segment and drag this into columns, right? So now we see the consumer, corporate, and home office, right? The three different possibilities for segment. Now in the middle, we want to look at sales. We will kind of want to see, okay, like how does like consumer like appliance sales compare to like the corporate appliance sales, right? That's kind of the goal of what we're doing right now. So let's take sales and drag it down to values. Cool. So now, right, we can see here we have all these values. It kind of aggregates all of our data from our big data set so we can look at here. Let's go ahead and highlight all of this stuff, right? Now I'm going to go insert. Now what we're going to do now is we're going to make a bar chart, right? So if I just did this first bar chart option, right, it's kind of hard to see what's going on, right? Kind of hard to tell what's happening. There's a lot of lines. You can see like some very tall lines, see like phones and chairs have a lot of sales, but kind of hard to compare and analyze all these things. So let's go ahead and change this chart type. I'm going to do a control click or right click on my graph and go to change chart type. I'm going to go to column, and this first one I'm going to make is this stacked column chart, stacked column. So here it just takes all those segments and combines them into one column each. So each kind of subcategory of product has one column, right? So the total sales is still represented, right? We can see the total sales, but we also have a breakdown within each column to see if it was home office, corporate, or consumer. So we could leave it like this. Another thing we could do is we could sort, right? What if we sort by sum of sales, right? And let's do descending. Cool. So now it's sorted in a way like this, right? So the highest selling products are in the front, right? And then it goes down. I could also change this to ascending if I want it flipped, right? Totally fine. And when I change my table, it's going to update my graph over here as well, which is very handy. So we can see that chairs and phones are still the most common, right? And fasteners are all the way at the bottom, right? They don't have a whole lot of sales. Now, we want to kind of analyze the breakdown between home office, corporate, and consumer, right? And we can see all that here, but I think a way we can visualize this better is if instead we look at this in terms of percents, right? So I'm just going to do a control click, go to change chart type, go back to column. Now instead of a stacked column, I'm going to do a 100% stacked column, right? So let's click this and kind of see what happens. So now instead of doing it as out of the grand total on the y-axis now I have percents, and all of these go up to 100%, right? And really it's taking just the total, right? So it'll take like the fasteners, even though there's not a lot of fastener sales, right? It's still going to break this down by percents, right? So we can see about like 55% of fastener sales were by the consumer. And this was really hard to see in the last graph that we had, right? So I think they're both really good graphs. They just show different things, right? So this is looking at more percents, while the last one was looking more at kind of totals and total sales. And we could kind of compare within each subcategory to see which one sells more. But here, it's just breaking down each subcategory by a percent. Awesome. Let's go back to our data set, and let's look at the last problem here. So we want to analyze kind of store trends over time, right? See if there's any trends over time that's happening, right? So we have our order date and our ship date, right? Now, if we were to kind of aggregate by order date, it'd be tough, right? Since they're probably orders from every day over the past like couple years, right? So that would be really challenging. Now, one thing that's really common, as you'll see, is we will kind of group things by quarter, right? So quarter is a very important kind of concept in finance life, right? So we break things down by quarter. So if you're in the first 3 months, so like January, February, March, you're in quarter one, and so on, and there's 4 quarters, right? So we need to add that attribute here. We don't have that variable, but we can create it, right, using this order date, and we can pull the quarter from here. So I'm going to click D and do control click and hit insert, and that just inserts a blank column right between here, between C and E. I'm going to call this quarters. Nice. Now, I want to basically take the values from my order date and turn it into quarters. So in Excel, we can do functions. I'm going to hit equals. Now, I'm going to just type a bunch of stuff out here. So first thing I want is the year, right? We want to know the year. So I'm going to say year and the built-in functions and go ahead and click. And I'm just going to click here. So Excel's smart enough where from here it can pull the year from this. So here we know it's going to be 16, right? So it's going to pull that year, 16. Awesome. So that's our first step. Now, I want to combine a couple of things. So I'm going to use this ampersand, and I'm going to do a quotation, and I'm going to do a dash, right? So that just adds a dash between year, and the next thing we're going to do is our quarter. So I'm going to do another ampersand, and we're going to do this round up feature, right? So basically what we're going to do is we're going to round up the month. So I'm going to do month, and once again, I'm going to click C2. So what this is going to do, it's going to take the month, right? So here, I guess this is 8 or August, right? It's going to pull that month from this cell, C2, and then we're going to divide it by 3, and then we'll round up. This is a way we can kind of find our quartile, right? I'm going to do a comma 0 and hit enter, and let's see if this works. Cool. So we know it worked because we have 2016-3. Now, I could have just typed 2016-3, but the problem with that is I would need to do that for every single row. But in Excel, formulas are really handy because I can just drag it down and it's going to autofill, right? So you see all of these are 2016, 2015, right? And we have the different quarters. So the quarter should be 1 through 4. Now, I could drag down all the way down, but this data set has like 10,000 rows, so I'm not going to do that. I can just hover over until I have this black plus sign and double click, right? Double click. And that's going to autofill everything for us. Cool. So now, if I go back to my old pivot table, I'm not going to have the quarters here because it just wasn't there when I created this pivot table. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a new pivot table. Pivot table, hit OK. There we go, right? And now, so I don't know why this is happening. This is happening for some people earlier, but when I were to copy this in, it's not going to let me see quarters for some reason. So a way around this is I can just kind of copy this data, and I'm just going to go make a new file real quick. And I can just paste this back in, right? And let's make a pivot table now. And now it should work. Some weird things happening with Excel. I don't know exactly why that's happening, right? But now we see quarters, right? And that's kind of what we care about. So we see quarters. Let's drag that into rows, and we see all of the different quarters. We go from 2014 quarter 1 to 2019 quarter 3. It's kind of the range of dates. Let's go ahead and do here. Unclick that, right? Now, what we really care about is just the sales over time for quarters, right? And also, right, let's look at region, right? Let's break this down by region. So let's take region and let's drag this in my columns this time, right? So now we can see the sales by region for each quarter, and let's take sales and drag it into our values. Awesome. So now we have all of our sales for each quarter for each region all the way here. Now, whenever we're kind of looking at something over time, we want to look at maybe like a line graph is going to be really helpful for us. So a line graph. Let's see what this looks like. Cool. So here's our line graph right away, right? You can see this here, and we've got our kind of legend on the right, central, east, south, and west, and then down here we've got our quarters. So right away we can see, guys, in 2017, that was kind of probably the most sales that we had in this time period, right? So we can look at this, right? Now we can also kind of change my chart types. We do change chart type. I go back to line. I'm gonna change this to a stacked bar graph, right? So this kind of just stacks everything and kind of gives like a rough estimate, not super accurate. But yeah, this is kind of a rough idea of kind of the sales for each quarter, right? And it's nice and clean, right? A lot cleaner than the last one. Now I'm also going to go down to this one, right? I could do this, right? And that just kind of fills in this gaps, right? If I want like just a filled in area chart. Now I'm gonna make what we call a stacked area chart, right? So here, once again, kind of like what we were doing with our bar charts, this breaks it down by percents, right? So if we're looking at 2014, right, this first quarter, we can see that Central, right, from this quarter, Central accounted for about like 35% of sales, right? And then it dipped for the next quarter, right? It goes down and then back up, right? So for the next quarter, then it dipped a lot, right? It only had about 10% of sales came from the Central region. Okay. So we could also add data labels and appropriate titles and all of these things here. We could just adjust the colors. Say it's like, oh, I don't really like this blue. I could take this blue and let's change it to purple. Sure. There we go. So that's how we can kind of customize it a little bit. All right. So I think that's all I have for you guys today. So the rest of this Excel sheet, this handout talked about like an extension where it's your job as a sales analyst to kind of come up with some ways to maximize profit for this company. So there's a bunch of different ways to do this. I really want you guys to kind of explore the different graphs and make some different pivot tables, see what you find. But great job on this. I will see you in the next video.